My Corona group and I are doing a December hat challenge in which they may ask me about any technique on the Corona knitting machine, and I try to incorporate that technique into a strip of hats using the basic idea from my Stripping for Charity book. The first video has already been published, and you can go back to that to understand the details about the hat challenge and how to finish all the hats. These are bulky patterns. They're free and complete in each video, and really any bulky machine may be used, but we're focusing on Corona techniques. Today's question is, how can we get a finished cast-on edge and still knit a continuous strip of knitting? It's a good question, and I'm going to show you several ways. This pattern is going to be a rolled brim hat, the very simplest kind you can make. We're bringing forward 72 needles that already have waste yarn knitted onto them. You saw my strip of hats hanging down below. Now, working from left to right, let's chain stitch loosely around the needle shanks. Loosely is important. I don't mean sloppy, but the needle is going to have to pass through there, and the carriage is going to have to make it pass through those chain stitches. So overly tight chain stitches make everything much more difficult, and they're not necessary. For this hat, chain stitch around 72 needles. And when you get all the way across, thread the yarn into the carriage. With needles all the way forward, the Corona and the Singer Studio machines both need to have these levers set to 2 in order to knit back from hold. On Brother, it's the H or N button. Set it on N. Normally, I knit a roll brim at 2 hole sizes, sometimes even 3 hole stitch sizes tighter than the main knitting. But with this cast on, for the very first row after the cast on, go ahead and use the main stitch size. That's to make things as easy on the carriage as possible. The row may still be stiff, but it should be doable. My main stitch size is 7, so I'm reducing to 5. The brim is 8 rows. We've already knitted 1, so we will now knit 7 more at the reduced stitch size. Then stop and turn the stitch size up to the size for the main knitting. Also set your row counter to 0. Now we've already knitted 8 rows, but those 8 rows don't really contribute to the total height of the hat because they roll up over the fabric. So we don't really count them. We want the hat in this 18-inch circumference size to be about 7 inches tall. So we're getting 6 rows per inch times 7 is 42 rows. That's what we'll aim for. Here's the chain stitched edge that results. It's very attractive, and the waste yarn will pull right out of it just as it does out of live stitches. That's covered in the very first video where finishing all the hats is discussed. Another way we can get a finished cast on is to double E-wrap. Leave the carriage at the right, hang a loop on the leftmost needle, wrap under 2 needles, back over 1, into the hook of the first needle, and pull back to create a stitch. Work all the way across the bed and thread the tail of the working yarn into the carriage as usual. Knitting the first row should also be done at main stitch size, just as when we chain stitched, for the same reasons. Our cast on is now too far back to work with, so we have to get a tool and lift and bring it forward, making sure that nothing unwraps. And one way to make that happen is, once it's forward, pull the needles all the way forward. From here, the machine will knit back from hold if you use the appropriate carriage setting. In this video, you're going to see some smears on the bed, and this is what they are. Jack has always recommended an LPS product called food grade silicone. Recently, several people have gotten in touch to ask if this is the product. Actually, it's not. This one is much heavier and thicker than the original, but I have been trying it out to see if it was workable because people are having difficulty finding the original. The original product quickly becomes nearly invisible. This one does not. It leaves a noticeable residue. However, I haven't had the slightest problem with it behaviorally, and wherever it's in the way, you can simply wipe it up. I wouldn't go so far as to recommend it because it is much messier than the original product, but it does lubricate and it does not seem to harm the machine. I've been using it for close to 2 years, and this is at least the 4th machine that I have used it on. So, on to the next method of casting on with waste yarn already in place, and you may have a ravel cord in position also. This is a version of the weaving cast on. Begin with your 72 needles in working position, and from there bring forward every other one all the way. Set the carriage so it will hold the needles that are all the way forward. On this machine, that's the number 1, same on Singers and Studios, and it's H on Brothers. Knit across. It's very important that the leading lever be the one that is on hold position. Now we're going to knit across again, but make sure that this leading lever is in knit back from hold position because we want it to knit the needles that we held last time. My green yarn is going to function as a ravel cord, and you can see that when it is removed, there won't be any unfinished runnable stitches. Both of those rows count as cast on only. So after them, let's knit 8 tight rows, then 42 regular rows, and that will be our hat. Change to waste yarn with or without a row of ravel cord knitted between the main and waste yarn, and move on to the next hat. Here is a finished hat with that kind of cast on. Tomorrow we'll add to our strip of hats with some knit weaving techniques.